This is Vanity Calamity, and this ain't really going to be a live stream this time. This is just going to talk about the game in general and how to fix the game. So, in the most recent PTB, we had they were testing anti-slug, anti-camp, anti-tunnel stuff, right? And these things were an absolute nightmare. But I decided, I came up with an idea, a plan that would fix these problems that people are experiencing with slugging, camping, and tunneling, on top of helping Killer too. Getting to the root of the problem. And so, because the root of the problem is Killers do these tactics because Jin regression is too pathetic. Jin defense is too pathetic. They don't have the power to properly do Jin defense and Jin regression over tunneling somebody out or camping somebody out. There's just not the pressure. Now, here's my plans. If behavior implements these, not only would it help the survivors be happier in the game state, but it also helped the killers be happier with the game. So, here's what you would do. At the beginning of the match, up until 2 gens are done, the survivors get the 30 seconds endurance when they get unhooked. So if the killer downs somebody at 5 gens and hooks them, and that person gets unhooked, they get 30 seconds of endurance. That way it discourages the tunnel out. But it doesn't make it impossible. But it is heavily discouraged because of the 30 seconds. Now, this effect should get disabled after 2 gens have been completed. So after 2 gens get done, it goes back down to 10 because at that point you're mid-game. And by mid-game, the killer could be having a rough time and they might need to do things like tunnel in order to help get themselves the win. Another thing they could do in conjunction, like all this is stacked on top of each other, like this is not just one thing, this is all together. Another thing is restore borrowed time. Now, borrowed time, back in the day, it used to give both people endurance when the person who was unhooked and the person who did the unhooking. This perk was very big back in the day, but they nerfed it and they reworked it and ruined it. And it added partial of it, base kit too. But I think they need to restore borrowed time to what it was. This would not only make it more, make camping less viable of a strategy, because if the person has borrowed time, they get the unhook off. Well, now you got 2 people that have endurance. It's not constantly just trading hook. Because that's what makes it super frustrating as a survivor, is the fact that your only option when a killer camps is to trade the hook. That's not really healthy for the game. And it's part of what makes camping strong. If borrowed time returned to what it was, this would make it less viable of a strategy. Not impossible of a strategy, but less viable of a strategy. Now, in conjunction with this, I think that it should get disabled at in-game. Because one thing that was super frustrating about the borrowed time era was the X gate's open, the X gate's right there, somebody comes by, unhooks the survivor off the hook, and now you can't get either one of them. Because they both have endurance, and they just run out the X gate. It's a free escape. That was frustrating to deal with. So I think restore overall time, but disable it at the in-game stage. It does not need to be available then. Now, another thing they need to do, in conjunction with this also, is because this is a pretty substantial buff to survivors here, right? Giving them and 30 seconds endurance off the hook, even if it's just for the first 2 generators that pop, and restoring borrowed time. Those are pretty substantial buffs. But what they need to do is buff killers' gen regression perks and gen defense perks. Survivors have some really strong gen progression perks, while killers have a majority of their perks to regress gens or defend the generators are pretty pathetic in a lot of times. They're not really... Killers cannot defend on these perks to help them win the game. It's why camping, tunneling, and slugging have become such go-to methods. Because relying solely on gen defense and trying to 12 hook just is not available. It's not an option. And we've seen this from the PTB, because the PTB tried to force this stuff. And most matches were lost by a lot of people. I've seen people who have 17,000 hours in this game and should be well above, great losses like Hens and things like that, and not Starvo. Even they could not handle that update. They might have gotten some wins, but a lot of people were trying to be bully squads in that for that same reason, which is probably contributed to a lot of wins. These would help fix the game. The 30 seconds endurance off the hook till 2 gens are complete would help with early game tunnel outs. And it would help discourage the camping. This would help. One of the bigger frustrations as a survivor is early tunnel outs, early camping. But it would not make it impossible either, and it would not punish the killer for trying. The option should always be there, even if it's discouraged, even if systems are in place to discourage it. And restoring the borrow time, that would help with camping throughout the entire match. This would make it not as well as a go-to strategy, right? I mean, people could still do it, especially chainsaw people or anyone who can get quick downs, just like in the old days. But it would also be very discouraged for most killers. And it would also serve as a buff to some of those weaker killers, like Leatherface. Hillbilly would get buffed, but he's not really that weak. And maybe even Wesker would get buffed by this too, because he's got the ability to get he could throw people away, he could prevent the unhook. Huntress, Springtrap, not S tiers are going to be buffed by this. So it would be better to help spread the gap between the lower tiers and the higher tiers, even if it's just for a few characters. And just killers, just killers, like I mentioned, they're just too pathetic to really be depend on their ability of like those perks like for gens. They're too pathetic to depend on gen regression, gen defense, because these perks got gutted. They got gutted because of the Skull Merchant era. Because for those who are unaware, the Chest Merchant era is what they called it, is where you could 3-gen so incredibly hard that matches could take 40 minutes, an hour, whatever, right? Because the gen regression perks were really good. There's no gen kick limit. And Skull Merchant's power was strong enough to hold these things, to put a lot of pressure on this. Now, Skull Merchant was nerfed, so that's no longer even possible with Merchant as well. Gen perks were nerfed, and there was a gen kick limit now. But this is too far, because without even gen regression perks that help us get regressed gens, it discourages us from going for gens. Why would we defend generators when we don't have anything good enough to defend generators? And as far as the gen kick limit goes, if I touch a gen and I go to patrol another gen and the survivor instantly runs back to it and touches it, well then I gotta kick that gen again to prevent them from popping it. Yeah, I can engage in the chase, but then if I engage in the chase, then another gen's gonna pop somewhere else. There's just not enough gen progression. We need a perk like Old Ruin returned. Something to help keep them, to help slow down the gens, right? We got some perks like that already, but most of them are more of just prevent the obsession from going faster, or perks like Pentimento, which makes you have to break a bunch of totems in order to get any real value from your, or make them have to break a bunch of totems in order to get value. It's just not good enough. They're just too weak to really compete. And also very, you just kind of have to like get lucky a lot of times, or run a build just to accommodate these perks like Pentimento. And so that's kind of how you could fix all the issues with Dead by Daylight. It would encourage killers with better perks to deal with gens. It would encourage them to actually care more about defending gens. Then with the other two, with the borrow time returned except in in-game, and the 30 seconds endurance for the first 2 gens that pop, this would encourage killers to pursue more hooks, to continue to go after people, at least for the first few generators. And even then, after, there's still the chance that someone could have borrow time. So it discourages camping in general without outright ending it, which is a way healthier way for the game to be played. And plus, borrowed time, if they restore borrowed time, it would be perk based, which means you could get that endurance, but you have to bring the perk. I'm not talking about a base kit old borrowed time. I'm talking about making the perk borrowed time the perk borrowed time. This would mean that not every match would be the same. There would be a fairly strong perk that survivors can bring, but it wouldn't be it would remove the frustration of what old borrowed time had of in-game. That's the biggest thing about old borrowed time. The in-game was rough. Not to mention, you gotta consider all the other perks survivors got these days. Old borrowed time would not be that strong in the modern Dead by Daylight landscape. It would be good, but not overpowered. You also gotta consider a lot of killers over this time have gotten sped up, like their cooldowns. So old Dead by Daylight, you would hit a survivor and it would take 5 years for your character to wipe his weapon or look at it before he could smack again. Killers are much quicker these days than that, and we got a lot more dash killers. But this would not only help this to an extent would help dash killers, but it also would help more trap killers like Hag, for example. Hag would not be left behind because of this update, right? The changes they were making in the PTB would ruin most of the roster. Luckily, those changes have all been canceled for now. They said they want to come back to the ideas later, which is not good. But luckily, they canceled it for now. And with my suggestions, this does not mean any killers will be left behind from this. Yeah, it might be a little bit harder for Hag a little bit, but she was not going to be left behind because of a little bit of endurance. She could still set up her web and be fine. In fact, it might even be better because of the additional improvements to Jin regression and Jin defense perks. So it would encourage her to patrol Jins rather than patrolling a person as much. Now, like I mentioned, this stuff would not end the possibility of a killer camping or tunneling. This would nearly discourage it, especially in the early game with the 30 seconds endurance being base kit. But it also let the killer have plenty of strength in the end game when the exit gates are powered. Because once the exit gates are powered, these effects are disabled. No borrowed time and no 30 seconds endurance. Because, okay, this is my thing on the 30 seconds endurance too. I said for it to end at 2 gens. Now, the reason for saying that, right? Instead of making it in-game, is by in-game, it's already too late. The killer really can't come back, and 30 seconds endurance is crazy. So by making it disabled after 2 gens, this would allow the killer to start camping and tunneling a little bit more. There's always the threat of borrowed time being an option, as the survivors would have the perk. If they had the perk, could make your actions of camping and tunneling much harder. But there's always the possibility they could still do it. And it would just help in general with the main problems that survivors face. Now, it also helped with the problems that killers face, too, with the Jin buffs. Not only would it make the game probably more enjoyable for killers, because now they can actually worry about generators again, instead of having to worry about getting the down and getting the hook. They can actually worry about one of their main objectives, the Jins. Because they really don't have much opportunity to worry much about the gens unless they were against a bad team. Because good teams are just going to completely get these gens done, and there's not much you could do about it. So there should always be the option for killers to be able to camp and tunnel, but it should also be discouraged in especially the early game, when there's still 5 gens, 4 gens. It should be discouraged, but not outright ended, not punished for it. And survivors should have perks. I don't think we should. I think behavior keeps making a mistake by trying to rely solely on perks or base kit things, right? They keep making base kit things. They should rely more on perks. Making a bunch of things base kit is not healthy for the game's health, because now it creates legitimate rules for the killers to have to follow. Just like we've seen with the PTB, where things that could have very easily have been a perk that survivors could have used, maybe to a weaker effect, were now given base kit, right? Like, we already got perks like off the record, so you're giving them base kit off the record. That's not needed. Survivors should run the perks that correlate with what they don't want, or what killers tend to do. And though I can see some frustration on the survivor's end with dealing with a slugger, even though I never get slugged, except if it's a twins, I don't think a base kit slug should ever be implemented. Like Unbreakable. That is too strong, and it nerfs killers like the twins, as a good example. Because twins is very slug heavy. Oni is very slug heavy. There are killers who are very slug heavy, and they should not be discouraged from doing it. Plus, we already got the DC option if everybody gets downed. We already got perks in the game to help with slugging. Run Unbreakable if you don't want to be slugged. Run Boon Exponential if you don't want to be slugged. I had a person there last night. Boon Exponential. They got themselves up while I was dealing with other people. They got themselves up and they got out. Granted, I probably should have seen it coming. They crawled halfway across the map because I kind of lost them while dealing with another survivor who was there. But that's still a thing they had at their disposal. And it worked. So there is always options, and there's perks on the game to help with this. I don't think we need any real anti-slugging measures, especially base kit ones. We got plenty of perks to deal with slugging. Even really strong ones like Conviction. So that's my stance on the slugging situation. As far as the campaign tunneling go, I've discussed a healthy plan on how to fix this issue too. Very simply, just buff the killer's perks for gens. To recap it, buff killer perks for gens. Make 30 seconds endurance for 2 generators, for the first 2 generators. Because once you got 3 generators, that's mid-game now. It's not early game no more. This discourages camping in the early game and tunneling in the early game. Make the perk borrow time more like the old perk borrow time, where it grants both people endurance. That helps with killers camping, downing somebody right next to the hook, and then, or like trading the hook, right? Killers can still quickly down somebody before they get the unhook, and that could still work in the killer's favor, but this would prevent trade-offs. Trade-offs are like against a Swift doesn't have to worry about this because they can coordinate the save. They can quickly get in and coordinate the save, and they don't have to worry about it as much. But when it comes down to solo queue, this is incredibly frustrating because then your teammates rather have to trade the hook, and you have to hope somebody's going to come save them. So, or you trade the hook and you gotta hope that somebody comes to save you. There's really not much situation where both people get away, and that is frustrating. And it makes you, in a lot of cases, you got teammates who just say, oh, the killer's camping, I'm not even going to go for the save. I'm not going to trade the hook. And they just leave you to die. You're left in this awful situations in a lot of cases because of this. Restoring overall time would allow the save, and if the survivor gets the save off, it doesn't mean you're infinitely trading the hook. It gives a little bit more opportunity for the survivors to live a bit. And that's all I gotta say on the matter. If they implemented these changes, the game's health would get a massive boost. Survivors would not have to deal with as much. Now, not impossible. That's the thing. It should never be impossible. It should always be abled, but discouraged. And right now in the game, it seems anytime I play Survivor, I get camped or tunneled. If not both. And that is just not fun. So, I get the Survivor's frustrations. This would solve that issue, or at least in a major part, because it would make it less viable for killers to do these tactics. But at the same time, killers need a buff themselves. And by making the Jinn perks better, you would give the killers the buff they need to be able to worry about generators again, rather than the hook. So all three of these things, the 30 seconds endurance for the first two gens, the borrow time, except that in-game, and the buff of killer regression and defense perks would all work in conjunction to fix the camping and tunneling problem. Slugging problem? I don't see a slugging problem anywhere, except there's a few killers that have to slug. I don't see camping, I don't see a slugging problem in the game. I hardly ever get slugged. So, the only thing I can say, if you have a massive problem where you're getting slugged constantly, which I don't know where that's happening at, is just bring your anti-slug perks. Bring Unbreakable, bring Boon Exponential, bring Conviction, bring whatever else. Like, there's plenty in the game to deal with the slug. You're not helpless. You got plenty of perks at your disposal. Run the perks. And that's where I'm going to end this here. That is how you could fix Dead by Daylight. That is how you can, in a healthy way, fix the problems that people have been complaining about for a very long time. Both survivors and killers need to benefit from these things. You can't just hurt one side and then buff the other side. That is not healthy. That is not balanced. You need to make both sides get buffed, or both sides get nerfed. And better to be buffed than nerfed. So, that is where I'm going to end this here. That is how behavior, obviously I got 18 subscribers, right? My words aren't way up there. It's not like anyone would probably ever see this and take my suggestion. But it'd be nice if they could. It'd be nice if they did see this. It'd be nice if they took my suggestion, and it'd be nice if they did these things. And I guarantee you would see a vast improvement in both survivors' uh, perspective of if they're getting camped or tunneled, and killers' perspective of how much they have to camp and tunnel. Because it is frustrating for killer to have to solely rely on these tactics. It is, to an extent, frustrating for a killer to have to rely on a camp and tunnel in order to win. These aren't good methods to win. And it's because of bad decisions in terms of behaviors, Jhin regression and Jhin defense perks that conjoined in this. If we had perks that were able to defend all our Jhins and actually were good enough to properly do it without survivors constantly like abusing the Jhin kick cap, the Jhin regression cap, or anything else, we'd be in a much healthier state in the game. Well, goodbye, and this is where I'm going to end it here. See ya.